People like you shouldn't be allowed to work in places like this." Those were the words that billionaire Landon Morrison spat out in French, his voice dripping with disgust as he stared at the young Latina waitress standing before him. The entire upscale Le Bernardin restaurant had gone silent. Alora's hands trembled as she gripped the wine bottle, her knuckles white with tension. Tears were forming in her dark eyes, threatening to spill down her flushed cheeks. Landon's wealthy companion erupted in cruel laughter, clearly enjoying the humiliation of this poor girl who couldn't possibly understand their sophisticated French insults. Other patrons turned in their seats, some looking away in embarrassment, others watching with morbid curiosity. A university textbook peeked out from Alora's apron pocket, the only clue to the secret life this waitress was living. But Landon wasn't finished. He leaned back in his leather chair, his $5,000 suit perfectly pressed, his Rolex catching the candlelight as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be the final blow. His next words in rapid French were designed to shatter this young woman's spirit completely. He was certain, absolutely certain, that this poor waitress couldn't comprehend a single word of his sophisticated cruelty. The restaurant held its breath. Everyone expected Alora to break down, to run away in shame, to crumble under the weight of his verbal assault. Her bottom lip quivered slightly. A single tear traced down her cheek, and then something extraordinary happened. Alora's posture straightened like a queen preparing to address her court. Her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Her trembling stopped, and when she opened her mouth, what came out wasn't broken English or desperate apologies. Perfect, flawless French poured out like poetry. The transformation was instant and electric. Landon's smug expression melted away as his face drained of all color. His companion's laughter died mid-breath, choking on his own shock. Every single person in that restaurant knew they were witnessing something that would change everything forever. But what Alora said next didn't just silence the room. It ignited a chain of events that would destroy a billionaire's empire, launch a viral movement that reached millions, and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon against hatred isn't anger or revenge, but grace, under fire. If you want to see how one waitress's response brought down a billionaire and changed her life forever, make sure you subscribe, because this story gets absolutely incredible. And let me know in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone stand up to a bully in the most unexpected way? Because what happens next will give you chills. This was just the beginning of a night that would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform in the world. But to understand how we got to this moment and why Alora's response was so devastating, we need to go back 3 months earlier to a tiny apartment where a brilliant young woman was fighting a battle that nobody knew about. 3 months before that life-changing night, Alora's world looked completely different. At 5 a.m., her phone alarm buzzed in a cramped apartment she shared with her family. But there was no gentle morning light streaming through windows, because the electricity had been cut off again. Her mother's medication cost $400 that month, and they had to choose between keeping the lights on or keeping her alive. So Alora studied her advanced linguistics textbooks by candlelight, the flickering flame casting shadows across pages of French grammar and syntax. Her younger brother Miguel slept on a mattress in the corner, his school backpack held together with duct tape because new supplies weren't in the budget. Their father had already left for the first of his 3 jobs: construction work at dawn, delivery driving in the afternoon, and cleaning offices at night. But Alora had something that poverty couldn't steal: a brilliant mind and an unshakable dream. She had earned a partial scholarship to Georgetown University's prestigious linguistics program, competing against students who had attended elite prep schools and taken private tutoring since childhood. The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses, not books, not the 1,000 little costs that separate the wealthy from everyone else. Every single night after her French literature classes, she walked 40 minutes through DC's streets to Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. While her classmates went to study groups in their dorm lounges, Alora served tables where customers casually spent more on a bottle of wine than her entire family earned in a month. She memorized vocabulary cards between taking orders, tucking them into her apron pocket to study during brief moments. While polishing silverware, she practiced French pronunciation under her breath, perfecting accents that her wealthy classmates paid private tutors thousands to learn. During her 15-minute breaks, she wrote essays on her phone, sometimes finishing assignments in restaurant bathroom stalls, because it was the only quiet place she could find. The other servers whispered about her. The brilliant girl who spoke 6 languages fluently, but still served their tables with a smile. They didn't understand how she never complained, never showed bitterness, never let the exhaustion show on her face. But Alora understood something they didn't. Education was her ladder out of poverty, and every single tip brought her one step closer to lifting her entire family up with her. Her linguistics professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, had noticed something extraordinary about this quiet student who always sat in the back row. Alora didn't just learn languages, she absorbed them, understanding cultural nuances and regional dialects that couldn't be taught from textbooks. She could hear the difference between Parisian French and Quebecois, between Spanish from Madrid and Buenos Aires. It was a gift so rare that Dr. Chen had only seen it maybe twice in her 20-year career. But none of Alora's wealthy classmates knew about her double life. They saw her worn clothes and assumed she simply had no fashion sense. They noticed she never joined them for coffee and thought she was antisocial. They had no idea that while they complained about cafeteria food, she was calculating whether she could afford lunch, or if that $3 needed to go toward Miguel's school supplies instead. That fateful evening started exactly like every other. Alora dragged herself to Le Bernardin after her advanced French syntax exam, her brain exhausted from 3 hours of complex grammatical analysis. Her feet ached from walking in shoes that were too small. She couldn't afford new ones, but she forced herself to smile as she tied her apron strings. The restaurant buzzed with its usual crowd of power brokers and celebrities. Politicians discussed legislation over $200 steaks, while tech moguls negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions. Alora had learned to move like a ghost among them, invisible but efficient, serving their needs while they shaped the world with casual conversations. Then Landon Morrison walked in, and the entire atmosphere shifted. He entered like he owned not just the restaurant, but the entire city. At 45, he commanded attention without effort. His $5,000 Armani suit was perfectly tailored, his platinum Rolex caught the candlelight with every gesture, and his very presence seemed to make other wealthy patrons sit up straighter. He had built his tech empire through ruthless acquisitions and maintained his power by ensuring everyone around him knew exactly where they stood in his hierarchy. Tonight was crucial for him. Jean-Philippe Dubois, the French investor sitting across from him, represented a $500 million deal that would expand Morrison Industries into European markets. Everything had to be perfect. When Alora was assigned to their table, she approached with the same professional courtesy she showed every customer. Her soft accent betrayed her Latina heritage as she greeted them in perfect English, her smile genuine despite her exhaustion. Landon barely glanced at her. To him, she was furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. He was already deep in conversation with Jean-Philippe about market projections and profit margins, the kind of discussion where millions changed hands between appetizer and dessert. But as the evening progressed, tiny irritations began building like pressure in a kettle. When Alora accidentally brushed his sleeve while pouring water, Landon's jaw tightened. When she had to lean closer and ask him to repeat his order because the restaurant's jazz quartet was playing loudly, his eyes flashed with annoyance. Each minor interaction, the kind of small, human moments that happen in every restaurant, seemed to fuel a growing disdain for this young woman who dared to interrupt his important business. Subscribe right now, because what happens next reveals how a billionaire's arrogance set up his own destruction. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to work while going to school? Because Alora's strength was about to be tested in ways she never imagined. The stage was set for an explosion that would change both their lives forever. But nobody in that restaurant could have predicted that the quiet waitress with the textbook in her pocket was about to deliver a response so powerful it would echo around the world. The breaking point came over 3 tiny drops of wine. 3 drops. That's all it was. As Alora carefully served the chocolate soufflé, her exhausted hands that had been working since 5 a.m., hands that had polished silverware for 4 hours straight, trembled almost imperceptibly. 3 microscopic drops of red wine fell onto the pristine white tablecloth beside Landon's plate. You could barely see them. Any reasonable person would have ignored something so insignificant, but Landon Morrison was no longer reasonable. The expensive wine had loosened his tongue and stripped away whatever thin veneer of civility he normally wore. His true character was emerging like poison seeping through cracks. He stared at those 3 drops as if they were a personal insult to his very existence. His face flushed red with rage that was completely disproportionate to what had happened. This was the moment when years of entitlement, privilege, and barely contained racism finally exploded. Landon looked directly at Jean-Philippe and began speaking in rapid, sophisticated French, his words chosen like weapons designed to humiliate and dehumanize. His voice carried across the quiet restaurant as he called Alora, cette petite servante ignorante, this ignorant little servant. He mocked her accent, her heritage, her very right to exist in their refined space. But he wasn't finished. The cruelty poured out of him like venom as he continued. Ces gens ne devraient pas être autorisés à travailler dans des endroits comme celui-ci. These people shouldn't be allowed to work in places like this. His voice dripped with condescension as he gestured dismissively at the textbook visible in her apron pocket. Then came the words that would haunt him forever. Elle prétend probablement étudier, mais nous savons tous qu'elle finira par nettoyer des maisons comme sa mère. She probably pretends to study, but we all know she'll end up cleaning houses like her mother. The racism wasn't just in his words. It was in his tone, his gestures, his complete dismissal of her humanity. He spoke about her as if she were an object, a piece of furniture that had malfunctioned. To him, she represented everything he believed was beneath him: poverty, struggle, people who didn't know their place in his carefully ordered world. Jean-Philippe shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly disturbed by what he was hearing, but he said nothing. Cowardice often wears expensive suits. Other French-speaking diners began to notice the commotion. Some looked appalled at Landon's behavior, their faces showing genuine horror. Others seemed to enjoy the cruel entertainment, smirking at this public humiliation of a powerless young woman. Alora stood perfectly still through it all, absorbing every poisonous word like blows to her soul. Her face remained carefully neutral, but inside, each insult landed like a physical assault. Years of struggling, of sacrificing, of maintaining her dignity despite poverty, all of it was being reduced to racist stereotypes by a man who had never worked a day for anything meaningful in his life. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, the woman who cleaned office buildings at night so Alora could attend university. Her father, whose hands were permanently stained from construction work. Her little brother Miguel, who wore second-hand clothes but carried himself with pride because Alora had taught him that dignity couldn't be bought or sold. But inside Alora, something was awakening. Not anger, something far more powerful. The same strength that had carried her through years of studying by candlelight, the same determination that made her walk 40 minutes to work every night, the same brilliance that had earned her a place at Georgetown despite every obstacle. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across every social media platform in the world, analyzed by linguists, celebrated by millions, and taught in schools as an example of grace under pressure. Alora didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She didn't raise her voice or show anger. Instead, she cleared her throat gently, like a professor preparing to deliver a lecture. And then she began to speak in French so pure, so eloquent, so sophisticatedly perfect that it instantly silenced the entire restaurant. Monsieur Morrison, she began, her accent flawless, her grammar impeccable, each syllable pronounced with the precision of a native Parisian speaker. Je vous remercie de m'avoir donné l'occasion de pratiquer mon français ce soir. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to practice my French tonight. The transformation was immediate and electric. Landon's smug expression cracked like glass. His mouth fell open in shock. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. But Alora continued, her words flowing like music, each phrase carefully chosen for maximum impact. She spoke of dignity, la dignité, explaining how it comes from within, not from bank accounts. She discussed the universal human desire for respect, le respect universel, and how true education comes not from wealth but from understanding and empathy. Her cultural knowledge was breathtaking. She quoted Voltaire, "Il faut cultiver notre jardin." We must cultivate our garden, explaining how personal growth matters more than material possessions. She referenced Simone de Beauvoir's writings on human dignity, demonstrating a literary sophistication that far exceeded anything Landon could claim. The entire restaurant was transfixed. Servers stopped serving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the jazz quartet seemed to play more softly, as if the universe itself was leaning in to listen. Alora's final words landed like poetry. La vraie noblesse ne vient pas de la richesse, mais de la façon dont nous traitons ceux qui ne peuvent rien faire pour nous. True nobility comes not from wealth, but from how we treat those who can do nothing for us. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Then the restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause that grew louder and louder until it became a standing ovation. Diners who had been eating quietly were now on their feet, clapping not just for her response, but for her dignity, her grace, her absolute destruction of a bully's assumptions. Landon sat speechless, his face crimson with shame, so deep it seemed to physically pain him. The $500 million deal he'd been courting evaporated as Jean-Philippe stared at him with undisguised disgust, clearly re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about this American businessman. But the most important observer was Dr. Margaret Whitfield, Georgetown University's biggest benefactor, who had been dining quietly in the corner booth. She had witnessed everything, and the wheels were already turning in her mind. Make sure you subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in justice. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone's prejudice completely backfire on them? Because this moment was about to change 2 lives forever, in ways that neither Alora nor Landon could have possibly imagined. Cell phones were already out, recording the aftermath of this incredible moment. Within hours, this exchange would circle the globe, but right now, in this restaurant, everyone present knew they had just witnessed something that would echo through history. Within 6 hours, everything changed forever. The cell phone videos started appearing on Twitter at 11:47 p.m. that same night. By midnight, "Respect has no language" was trending in 12 countries. By dawn, it had reached every continent on Earth. The footage was crystal clear. Landon's racist French insults, Alora's dignified response, the moment his face drained of color as he realized his victim was more educated than he could ever dream of being. CNN picked up the story first, then BBC, then every major news outlet worldwide. "Waitress destroys billionaire's racism with perfect French" became the most watched video of the year. But this wasn't just viral content. This was a moment that exposed everything ugly about privilege and prejudice, while celebrating the quiet strength of those society overlooks. Georgetown University's president, Dr. Harrison, called Alora personally at 6 a.m. His voice was emotional as he apologized for any student having to endure such treatment while working to afford education. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, who had witnessed everything from her corner table, had already arranged something extraordinary, a full scholarship covering not just tuition, but living expenses for Alora's entire family. But while Alora's life was transforming in beautiful ways, Landon's world was collapsing in real time. By Tuesday morning, Morrison Industries' stock had plummeted 40%. Investors were pulling out faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship. Jean-Philippe Dubois didn't just cancel their $500 million deal. He went public, releasing a statement that demolished Landon's international reputation. "I cannot and will not associate with individuals who harbor such disgusting prejudices." Mr. Morrison's behavior was not just racist, it was evil. Corporate partners canceled contracts worth billions. Universities rescinded honorary degrees. Charity boards expelled him overnight. His own employees were resigning in droves, unable to work for a company led by such a person. Within 1 week, Morrison Industries had lost $2 billion in market value, and Landon personally lost 70% of his net worth. But the video's real power wasn't in destroying one racist billionaire. It was in what it built. Alora received over 40,000 messages from students around the world sharing their own stories of prejudice and perseverance. Scholarship funds were established in her name. Universities began examining their own cultures, asking how many brilliant minds they were overlooking because of economic background or ethnicity. The response became a teaching tool used in Harvard Business School's ethics courses, in diversity training programs at Fortune 500 companies, and in high schools across America. Professors used it to teach about implicit bias, dignity under pressure, and the power of education to level any playing field. 4 years later, Alora graduated summa cum laude with a double major in international relations and linguistics. Her graduation speech, delivered in 6 languages, brought the entire auditorium to tears. She spoke about her mother, who was there wearing a beautiful dress instead of a cleaning uniform. She spoke about her father, whose calloused hands now rested because his children's success had given him the retirement he'd earned. She spoke about Miguel, who was now attending an elite prep school on a full scholarship. The United Nations recruited her immediately. At 26, Alora became one of their youngest senior translators, using her gift to bridge cultures and prevent the kind of misunderstandings that start wars. She translated for presidents and prime ministers, helping world leaders find common ground across language barriers. Her family moved into a beautiful home in Georgetown, not far from the university where she'd learned that knowledge truly is power. Miguel thrived in his new school, carrying himself with the same quiet dignity his sister had taught him. Their parents retired comfortably, finally able to rest after decades of struggle. But perhaps the most remarkable part of the story happened 5 years after that night at Le Bernardin. Landon Morrison, who had lost his empire but gained something invaluable, humility, sought Alora out. He had spent those years in therapy, working with diversity counselors, truly confronting the racism that had poisoned his soul. When he found the courage to contact her, it wasn't to make excuses or seek publicity. It was to apologize genuinely and ask if she would speak at his rebuilt company's diversity training program. Alora agreed, because she had learned that true strength lies in forgiveness and education, not revenge. Her speech that day, delivered to Landon's employees while he sat in the front row, listening with tears in his eyes, became another viral moment. But this time, it was about redemption, growth, and the possibility that even the most prejudiced hearts can change. The Presidential Medal for Civic Excellence came next, presented by a president who called her an example of grace under fire that every American should study. World leaders sought her counsel. Universities offered her professorships. Publishers wanted her memoir. But Alora's greatest achievement wasn't any award or recognition. It was sitting in her office at the United Nations, her Georgetown diploma hanging proudly on the wall next to photos of her family, knowing that respect, dignity, and intelligence had transcended every barrier society had tried to build around her. Her story inspired millions of young people from humble backgrounds to pursue their dreams despite every obstacle. Scholarship applications from first-generation college students increased by 300% the year after her video went viral. The hashtag #EducationIsEverything became a rallying cry for students working multiple jobs to afford school. That night at Le Bernardin, Landon Morrison thought he was humiliating a powerless waitress. Instead, he had awakened a force of nature who would change the world, not through anger or revenge, but through grace, intelligence, and an unshakable belief that every human being deserves respect. 3 drops of wine had started it all. But what followed proved that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with the quietest voices, and that true nobility has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with character. Make sure you subscribe for more incredible stories of people who refused to be broken by prejudice and turned their pain into power. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Alora's situation? Because her response didn't just change her life, it changed how the world thinks about respect, dignity, and the power of education to overcome any obstacle.